Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Christopher Speron. I'm Senior Vice President of Development and Membership at the Human Rights Campaign. We are thrilled to welcome all of you today to join us for our HRC Town Hall meeting. We've called this event, What a Difference 2 Weeks Can Make, and it really is a moment for us to reflect on the incredible progress that's already been made in the first 2 weeks of the Biden-Harris administration. Additionally, the Human Rights Campaign is operating on all cylinders in many other ways to advance LGBTQ equality. And what we wanted to do today was bring together a team of the staff members of HRC to really update you on the incredible work we're doing on all fronts. So to begin, we actually are going to welcome the president of the Human Rights Campaign, Alfonso David. Alfonso has been leading the Human Rights Campaign for a year and a half. He is an incredibly inspiring leader who is driving HRC to new incredible places, and we're thrilled to have him with us today. So it is now my pleasure to introduce HRC President Alfonso David.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chris, for that introduction. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I hope that you're all staying safe and dry in this week of really intense weather. Even as a New Yorker, I have to say that after being cabined in the house for weeks and weeks and weeks due to the pandemic, being cabined in the house again due to the snow is a lot to process. But even though we're living in challenging times, we have a lot to celebrate. It is hard to believe that the inauguration was only 2 weeks ago. And what a deeply moving day that was, to hear President Biden, as our 46th president, address the nation as we begin. And in his words, to say, quote, "To set the sights on the nation we know we can be and we must be." To see the first Latina Supreme Court justice swear in the first Indian American, first Black person, and first woman vice president, our community's long-standing champion, Kamala Harris. To see now Secretary Pete Buttigieg and his husband Chasten watching along on that stage, and to hear Amanda Gorman set the world ablaze with her showstopper of a poem. That was quite an historic day. But as I've said before, this chapter in our history will not be defined by the history we have made, but instead it will be defined by the actions we take now. That is something that President Biden and his administration understand full well. They have not missed a moment or missed a beat in delivering on their promises and delivering the change that our communities really need. During the transition, the Human Rights Campaign shared a blueprint for positive change, which is a brief that included more than 85 policy recommendations, reaching across the federal government, and it's really aimed at bettering the lives of LGBTQ people. And during the first 2 weeks, the Biden administration has already started taking action on delivering some key policy recommendations. On day one, President Biden issued an executive order that implements the US Supreme Court's ruling in Bostock versus Clayton County. And he implemented that ruling all across the federal government. This is the most wide-ranging LGBTQ executive order in our history. And it has already improved the lives of millions of people. Later that week, the Biden administration's Department of Justice reversed the Trump administration's last-minute attempt to limit the Bostock ruling. The administration also issued an executive order establishing a policy that the federal government should pursue a comprehensive approach to advancing equity for all, including people of color and LGBTQ people. Now, specifically, this order says that the heads of each agency must review their agency programs and policies to assess whether underserved communities and their members are facing systemic barriers in accessing benefits and in accessing opportunities that are supposed to be provided by those agencies. The administration also issued another executive order last week to reverse the ban on transgender military service. The Pentagon has now begun the process to eliminate this arbitrary discriminatory ban that has not only harmed trans service members, but our entire military. In addition to all of these executive orders, they didn't stop there. They also issued orders advancing racial justice, environmental justice, and supporting underserved communities. In just 2 weeks, this administration has already delivered on key promises to our community and countless others. and with the most diverse cabinet in US history. Now, Secretary Pete Buttigieg. The Biden administration is much closer to reflecting the great diversity of our democracy. These actions represent really important steps for us in becoming a nation that we know we can be. I want us all to take a moment and reflect on where we are and what we've achieved. We have a lot of work to do, but it's worth taking a step back. This was a hard-won victory, and each and every one of you worked incredibly hard to get us here. In the midst of multiple crises, you stayed with us, you kept the promise of our democracy alive. And we know that these crises have not gone away, not for our community, not for our country, not for the globe. Already in the states, we're seeing anti-equality legislators once again prioritizing discrimination and attacking the rights of transgender youth. As our state equality index makes clear, we have won much needed progress, but much progress remains. In 29 states in this country, LGBTQ people remain at risk due to the lack of statutory protections across many areas of life. That is why we still need the Equality Act. And we need our allies to get this crucial legislation over the finish line, including pro-equality corporate leaders. Our 2020 Corporate Equality Index continues to show incredible growth in the number of employers that are committed to implementing LGBTQ inclusive policies and practices. And many of those leaders have been outspoken and crucial allies in advancing LGBTQ equality. We will need pro-equality allies, and we will need them to remain united as a coalition in the crucial battles that we have ahead to deliver the promise of this nation and the principles that this nation was built on. As I wrote earlier this week, in order for us to really realize the United States of America and the ideals that this country is built on, we must ensure the survival of Black people. This is a nation that stands on the back of Black people who have been brutalized, cast into prisons and graves, while white supremacist forces have gained a foothold in our government. We will never achieve the promise of our democracy. We will never achieve liberation as a community if we don't invest in Black futures. And this is a charge that the Human Rights Campaign takes seriously. And it has been my firm commitment since I took the helm of this organization a year and a half ago. That is why yesterday, I was so proud to announce the launch of our initiative with Gilead Sciences to really hurry up the history in the fight to end HIV. While HIV affects Americans from all walks of life, the virus continues to disproportionately affect Black and Latinx LGBTQ people. The CDC predicts that 1 out of 4 Latinx gay and bisexual cisgender men and 1 out of 2 Black gay and bisexual cisgender men will be diagnosed with HIV in their lifetime. 26% of Latinx trans women and almost half of Black trans women in the US are living with HIV. Today, we have the science to end HIV, but stigma, racism, and systemic discrimination stand in the way. These are barriers that our new 7-figure grant with Gilead seeks to urgently address, and we are going to be focusing on core bodies of work, from changing the narrative through storytelling and public education to building a new system for change with a key focus on HBCUs and other campus and community-based organizations. This grant will also allow us to deepen and expand our transgender justice work as an organization, as a community, and as a nation. The past 2 weeks have underscored that we have a lot of work to do, but also we have a lot to celebrate. Amanda Gorman, in her inaugural poem, wrote, "It's because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's past we steep in and how we repair it." In the moment there's so much progress is possible, we must once again step into the path of history and the path of change. It's a path that many of us have walked before, our forefathers, our foremothers, our foresiblings. Young people like Amanda will walk along after we are all gone. I am really proud to be the president of the Human Rights Campaign at this time in our history. And I hope that all of you are proud of everything that we've accomplished. Although we have challenges ahead, let's never forget the resilience that our community has, the history that our community has, and the role that we play in framing the promise of this democracy and the role that we play in formally realizing it. So with that, I will turn it back over to Chris Spearon, who is going to transition us to our next speaker in a really great lineup of speakers that we have today.
Alfonso, thank you so much. And we are so proud that you are the president of the Human Rights Campaign. Thank you for that great introduction of what has occurred over the last 2 weeks and your vision going forward. You're going to hear from a number of our colleagues at HRC today. And I hope as you're following along, you'll see that we'll be populating the chat with some links to important documents, information, and some of the research that we've been doing throughout the course of our work that we thought you might enjoy and be able to kind of reference going forward. Here to talk about the work we've been doing on the public policy side, I'm thrilled to introduce HRC's Senior Vice President for Policy and Political Affairs. Jody Winterhoff is going to be here with us to talk a lot about what she sees happening and what we're doing to impact change going forward. Jody, take it away.
Thank you, Chris, very much. I'm really happy to be with everybody tonight. As Alfonso was saying, we have seen more of the promise of our democracy with this new administration. And I know some folks were focusing on, we had a number of Wednesdays in a row that had started with I's. I'm going to say we started with more of a promise of our democracy and leaning into it, a new president and vice president, progress across these 2 weeks. And today, Pete sworn in, Mayor Pete Buttigieg sworn in as the first openly LGBTQ person to be approved by the United States Senate. And I would also add that it was a strong bipartisan vote in both the committee and on the floor of the United States Senate. And his vote on the floor, if you did not see that, was 86-13. For those of you who are wondering, I bet most of you can come up with who probably those 13 are. But truthfully, 86-13, that's a very, very strong vote for Pete. And to begin, Secretary Buttigieg today being sworn in as a Secretary of Transportation. Alfonso contexted some of the victories. I want to add a couple things, and then Sarah Warbelow, who is our legal policy director, is on as well. And she will go a little further into some of the state ledge and other work that we are doing. But, look, I want you to understand that laying out the blueprint that Alfonso mentioned, where we had over 85 recommendations for the new administration, we use tools like that, not only to share with you kind of where we see the roadmap and some of the things to do, but there's been a transition team that's been working actually before the election day and through inauguration day to really tee up some of these things for different agencies and for the White House. And so these things don't fall from just the sky. It takes a lot of work to work with that transition team and get everybody ready, make the recommendations we made, but also work with those teams to help them understand the importance to the community. And so the team has been doing that kind of work. So one of the ones I want to highlight, in addition to the rollback of the ban on transmilitary service, is the Bostock executive order. And one of the things I want to highlight about that is not only, therefore, is it part of federal policy because by way of the executive order, there are also now states attorneys general who are moving to implement Bostock in their states. That is also really important. And so, in the states, each state can be a little different. So if you're wondering, does my state have this or not? There are 22 states plus the District of Columbia that have laws that explicitly prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity in employment, housing, and public accommodations. Then some of the other states that are not covered currently, states attorney generals or the Human Rights Commission or the governors in some cases can request this be moved. And so that's what we're working on now, is to get more and more states to do this. And I have a quick update there. Arizona, Kansas, Nebraska, North Dakota, Pennsylvania, and as of earlier today, Florida have now added their states to those protections. And so that's another important component of having the federal government put a strong marker down, but taking that to the states. And we will continue, to work in those ways. So, as mentioned, we have these recommendations, and we're going to keep rolling up our sleeves to get more and more done. It is no shock to any of you that the Trump administration did so many different things to harm the community. This piece is going to take a lot of work. And some of them are going to feel like, well, for heaven's sakes, it's just getting us back to where we need to be. But some of them are also rewriting and working on these regulations to make them better. And so some are able to be done quickly, like some of these executive orders. Some will take more time. So we plan to be working morning, noon, and night on these to continue the change that we are seeing. In some of the other pieces that we see, there needs to be changes in global policy. I think we're going to hear an update in the next couple of days that there may be some changes. The administration is moving on in that direction. Hopefully tomorrow, maybe as early as tomorrow. And then we also want to see a couple of interagency working groups on LGBTQ rights globally, and also to help us meet this horrific challenge of the violence that Black and brown transgender women in particular are facing in this country. We need this to be a government-wide effort and partnering with states and localities. And so we are working hard to move forward on that concept as well. And then there are pieces that really do impact people's day-to-day lives as well, around healthcare and the whole need to rescind and replace regulations that restricted coverage of Section 1557 in the ACA. So some of these things get pretty granular. We just want you to know we've worked to be very thorough with the transition team, and now working with the folks in the White House and those who are arriving in agencies to really work to make this first 100 days and the first few months of this administration really show our community the changes that can be made and that we support. And then I want to turn to just quickly the Equality Act. This is something we have been working on for a long time and got passed in the House of Representatives in the spring of 2019, just in time for Pride Month, thank heavens. And so now with the Senate and the 2 wins in Georgia, go Georgia, the pro-equality and the Democrats now have control. And so Chuck Schumer can work to bring up the Equality Act. We have work to do. We have to get some of the Republicans who have showed some interest in it to actually support it. We have to get to that 60 vote threshold. But the House is going to, in the next few weeks, going to be introducing it. And it looks to be that it'll be introduced in a bicameral way, both the House and the Senate. Many of the folks who led before on the bill will continue to lead on the bill. We obviously will miss desperately Congressman John Lewis, who was so important to the early years of really moving the Equality Act and being such a leader and explaining it. But you have Congressman Cicilline, Speaker Pelosi, the Equality Caucus co-chairs and vice chairs are all very engaged in the House. Chairman Nadler of the Judiciary Committee, all very committed to working this and getting a successful introduction, and then move the bill in the House. And then the Senate is going to take longer, and we will have to organize and roll up our sleeves to organize in the states and in Washington to really be able to move the bill. But it is really a new day in the Senate and in the House. To move this in both chambers would be amazing. And that is the path that we are on. And lastly, in our state legislatures, Sarah will also dive a little more into this, but we've been monitoring and really organizing in a number of states. Our community knows that when we make progress, and the Bostock decision last summer, the success in the elections of defeating Trump, and now, the progress that's being made, we know when those things happen that we face backlash. And we are facing backlash in the states. There are a number of anti-transgender bills that are going through. They are primarily around transgender youth receiving gender-affirming care. And they are also trying to prohibit transgender youth from participating in sports. And in some cases, not only transgender youth, but also young adults who might be in college and wanting to participate in sports too. So, those bills are going to keep coming. And there is a surge. We are really working hard in states like, Montana and the Dakotas. Mississippi has a bit of a challenge that's popped up here in the last few days. But there are a number of states, and I'm going to reel off some of the states that we're monitoring It doesn't mean these are the only states, but in many cases, we really are having to work diligently. Alabama, Arizona, Iowa, Idaho, Michigan, Missouri, Mississippi, Montana, North Dakota, Oklahoma, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, and Texas. Then there's another set of states that we're also, keeping our eye on because they often flare up with some things: Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, North Carolina, New Hampshire, West Virginia, Wyoming. Now, if I didn't mention you and you think you have one of the worst bills ever, there are many states where bad bills get introduced and they don't go anywhere. But if any of you ever have questions around that, you can always send them in to us, and we will, be in touch on this, because we track hundreds of bills, but we try to make sure we're putting the energy and the resources that many of you give us and that we have in our budgets and in our plans to really fight back in the states where things might have a chance of moving. And so we're fighting on many fronts right now, alongside many of you as volunteers and our coalition partners in states across the country. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Chris, because I know other folks have to cover some ground, but thanks for all you do with us, and we really appreciate your support. So Chris, back to you.
Thanks so much, Jody. And I want to remind everybody, we dropped in the chat a copy of the HRC Blueprint for Change, which is what we're, the outline, as you heard Jody reference, that really covers all of the political work and the policy changes we're asking the Biden-Harris administration to take on. Now to talk a little bit more about the legal issues and the policy issues happening in the states, I'm going to bring up HRC's legal director, Sarah Warbelow. Sarah, you're on.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everybody. I want to dig in a little bit more on the executive order implementing Bostock, because it really is so sweeping, has such tremendous consequences for LGBTQ people all across this nation. When the Supreme Court decided Bostock versus Clayton County, most people walked away understanding that that meant that LGBTQ people were covered by our federal non-discrimination laws with respect to employment, right? That you couldn't fire someone because they transitioned, and that you couldn't sexually harass someone who's LGBTQ or refuse to give a promotion to a lesbian or a bi woman. But it has consequences that really go far beyond just employment. And that's because the analysis of the Supreme Court was that the term sex in and of itself had implications for sexual orientation and gender identity, that you can't think or talk about what it means to be an LGBTQ person without contemplating someone's sex. And we have many federal laws that prohibit discrimination on the basis of sex. So this executive order by President Biden means that agencies are going to take a look at all of those federal laws, housing laws, education laws, laws that prohibit credit discrimination, and all sorts of one-off laws that you've maybe even never thought about. Community service block grants, temporary assistance for needy families, refugee resettlement programs that have sex non-discrimination protections in them. And those agencies are now going to accept complaints when people experience discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. So we want you to get the word out. If people are experiencing discrimination, it's time. They need to go to the federal government and ask for that assistance in remedying the discrimination that they're facing. And then, of course, over time, we're going to be seeing these agencies issue new rules, new guidance, so that everybody has the information that they need to remedy that discrimination, and most importantly, to cut that discrimination off at the knees so it doesn't happen in the first part. So Jody mentioned that we're also seeing states adopt the same analysis, and this is a critical part of advancing equality for LGBTQ folks based on this clear, critical analysis. But we also want to take a step further, because while non-discrimination protections are so key, there's so many other areas of life that state legislatures really have the ability to influence, whether it's anti-bullying laws, laws that address suicide prevention, that are inclusive of LGBTQ people, making it easier for people to update their identity documents, or even collecting data on sexual orientation and gender identity so our policymakers can make better decisions about what our community needs. That's why we have released the State Equality Index. And this is our 7th edition of the State Equality Index, and it provides that roadmap for state legislatures, both to understand what it means to advance equality, but also to see what are the kinds of laws that really undermine rights for LGBTQ folks. Sometimes these laws look very plain on their face, and you might not realize that they're actually intended to target LGBTQ people. And so we want to provide people with that critical information. Excitingly, we are seeing more and more states move up into that top category of providing protections for LGBTQ people. This year, both Hawaii and New Hampshire rose in the ranks to that very top category. And Virginia has just surged by leaps and bounds by adopting the Virginia Values Act last year and passing numerous other pieces of pro-equality legislation. As Jody mentioned, it's also not all roses as we look across the states. We have state legislators who really have made it their mission to try to erase trans people from existence. And that's what these bills do. You could look at it as a one-off bill. Maybe, my kid isn't that interested in athletics. It doesn't seem like a top issue for me. Or I'm an adult and maybe access to care is something I've already taken care of for myself. And I'm just not really thinking about what that might mean for somebody else, particularly in another state, right? But what these bills in their totality is about erasing trans people from existence. It is legislators saying we don't want to have to acknowledge that trans people exist. And that's why we've got to fight these bills in every state and at every turn. Because if they get a toehold, they're going to try to make that the law of the land. And we've got to protect LGBTQ folks, particularly trans people, in every community, not just a few. And that's why these are so important. I will also note that we are just recently seeing an entire slate of new bills dropping by the moment, almost hard to keep up with them, that are allowing for doctors and insurance providers, hospitals, to refuse care to LGBTQ people. In fact, anyone that they have a moral disagreement with. That means that a doctor could refuse to provide PrEP to a patient because they disagree with their sexual orientation. It means that an insurance company could refuse to cover hormone therapy, that people who work in hospitals could refuse to check somebody in because they're there for any reason that doctor disagrees with, a lesbian couple seeking fertility services. And so we'll be providing you more with those updates as those bills unfold. But that is the new wave that we are seeing really just cropping up almost overnight here. With that, I'll turn it back to you, Chris.
Sarah, thank you so much. We have a lot of really smart people at the Human Rights Campaign, and we know that for a lot of folks, who just want to live their lives, having to know all of the things that we talk about can feel really intimidating, can feel overwhelming, and that's why working with the Human Rights Campaign and supporting HRC really does make a difference, because we're out there every single day fighting for our community. We know some of you like to have a cursory understanding and really believe HRC is out there fighting. We also know a lot of you want to be more involved and actually really engaged in the work more directly. And for those of you who want to do more and want to get more out of the experience, we hope you'll sign up to receive our text alerts, to hear about breaking news and things that are occurring as they are. So all you need to do is text 100 days to 472-472 to get on our list to receive important updates about the kind of work we're doing. What I love about HRC is we really operate at all levels, from public policy to where people congregate, to how people make a living, to how people navigate the healthcare system, as well as passing laws and defeating people who are really out to get our community. And, when I came out 30 years ago, I didn't realize I needed an instruction manual in terms of really needing to understand the places where I could be discriminated against, where I needed to be fearful, where I needed to be hopeful. But every single day we at HRC are fighting for you. And part of the call tonight, in addition to hearing the really important updates on the public policy side, we wanted to bring a lot of the work of the HRC Foundation forward as well, because we've just launched some really exciting initiatives in those areas as well, which really impact the lived experience of LGBTQ people. So I'm thrilled to introduce this section, and I want to remind all of you we'll have question and answer at the end, but I want to invite the HRC Senior Vice President for Programs, Research and Training, Jay Brown, to the screen now. Jay, welcome to the forum.
Thank you so much, Chris. It is so great to be here with all of you today. Through our programs, we seek to make the spaces where we live and where we work more inclusive and more welcoming. Places like schools, churches, doctors' offices, and foster care agencies. We know that no matter the state of the law, we can make transformational change by changing hearts, minds, and policies and practices. And we put a special focus on work that advances progress for LGBTQ people who are the most marginalized. As a trans man, I've seen firsthand how this work can impact our daily lives. From our access to inclusive healthcare, to the experiences of students in classrooms, to the support of a workplace offers an employee who's coming out on the job. And I'm thrilled to be introducing two of my colleagues today to talk a little bit more about exciting developments in their programs in just these last 2 weeks. First, you'll hear from Jay Maurice McCants-Persall, who leads our HIV and Health Equity program. And then you'll hear from Beck Bailey, director of our Workplace Equality program. Jay Maurice.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Jay. As Alfonso mentioned, yesterday we announced our new initiative with Gilead, which focuses on rewriting the narrative and changing systems to end HIV. This work will be rooted in the lived experiences of our Black and Latinx community members, folks who experience elevated risk of HIV exposure due to systematic and racism and discrimination. However, we know that without addressing the lived experiences of the Black and Latinx people, we'll continue to fail in our desire to end the HIV epidemic. I'm thrilled to be leading this new initiative, which will leverage all of HRC's strengths. We have 4 major pillars that will center our work. First, we'll recenter the HIV narrative on Black and Latinx communities, those who most impacted by HIV, through an expansive public education media campaign aimed at 1, dismantling stigma, and 2, advancing understanding. Second, we're building a grassroots, youth-driven response to HIV that will equip youth advocates with storytelling tools and information needed to positively transform their communities. And third, we're leveraging the strength of our long-term HBCU program to bridge and strengthen partnerships between HBCUs, community-based organizations, and health centers. And through this work, we will foster campus-wide structural and system changes to provide effective HIV prevention and treatment services, education, and resources to the faculty and staff. And fourth, we'll be helping youth-serving professionals, and social workers to do something that's long overdue, to talk about sex with young people, and talk about sex in a way that advances the understanding and stops stigma and shame. Through a new training curriculum and tools, we'll give them the path to create life-saving conversations in their work. Underpinning all of this amazing work is our relationship with minority-led and serving community-based organizations, also known as CBOs. These are the folks on the front line of the epidemic. These CBOs are our trusted community partners who will offer us valuable community input and serve as our HIV prevention and treatment referral partners. I cannot wait to get started with all this amazing work, and thank you so much for the opportunity to share this with you. Turning it over to my colleague, Beck Bailey. Beck.
Thanks so much, Jay Maurice. We are so excited for the HIV and Health Equity team and your work ahead. Hi, everyone. My name is Beck Bailey. I'm director of HRC's Workplace Equality program. My pronouns are he and him. And I'm here to share with you a few highlights from last week's release of the 2021 Corporate Equality Index. This was HRC's 19th annual report, and the progress made over these nearly 2 decades is phenomenal, and I want to tell you just a little bit more about it. For example, in the very first CEI in 2002, We rated just 319 companies, and we had a baker's dozen, 13 of them score top marks. This year, we rated 1,142 companies, and we had a record-breaking 767 earn a 100% score and the designation of being one of the best places to work for LGBTQ equality. In my nearly 7 years here at HRC, I continue to be especially proud of the work our team is doing to advance transgender and non-binary inclusion in the workplace. The CEI gives us some key indicators of that progress. For example, when HRC began the CEI in 2002, just 5% of companies had gender identity protections. Today, almost all of them do, 99.7%. And when we think about employer-provided transgender inclusive healthcare coverage, this was basically unthinkable in 2002. And it's so critical to the health and wellness of trans people like me. Today, this kind of coverage is available at 91% or over 1,000 of our CEI-rated companies. And it's available across 71% of the Fortune 500 alone. As you can see, the CEI is a critical tool in driving the adoption of these important policies and benefits in the workplace. But we know that these policies and benefits, while critical, are alone insufficient to ensure LGBTQ people are fully welcomed and supported at work. That's why all of us here at the HRC Foundation will continue to drive the conversation forward until every LGBTQ person can truly thrive at work. And now I'll turn it back over to Jay.
Jay, we're so glad you were so passionately sharing a lot of important information, but we actually had you on mute. So we're going to bring you right back again. Hopefully you can unmute yourself, and we're going to have you share what you were sharing all over again. So I'm going to turn it back over to the show director to bring Jay Brown back on the screen. Jay.
All right, thank you. Sorry about that, y'all. So thank you so much to Jay, Maurice, and Beck. These are just two of our programs. We have 11 programs and initiatives, fantastic stuff that folks are doing. And before we go, I just wanted to give you a sneak peek about some other amazing work that's coming up next week. One of my favorite events of the year, Time to Thrive, is just around the corner. This starts February 9th. It's a conference designed to give teachers, counselors, youth serving professionals, and parents the tools that we need to help LGBTQ young people thrive. This conference is the 8th annual conference this year, and because we're going online, you're all invited. So for free registration for HRC members, just visit HRC's site at timetothrive.org, and you can register today to join us next week. I really encourage you to join. You'll hear from young people and a variety of folks who are experts in their field with some amazing tools and stories. So please do join us. Now, thank you for the support of our work, and I'll turn it back over to Chris.
Thanks so much, Jay. And that was really great. So nice you did it twice. So we're going to bring the panel back for some great questions and answers. And these are questions that were submitted from our members and supporters from around the country. But before I do that, or as they're coming back, I want to just summarize a lot of what you just heard today. You heard over the last 2 weeks, HRC helped advance and sort of lay a groundwork for executive orders to really further protections for LGBTQ community during the Biden-Harris's first 2 weeks in administration. Confirmation of Secretary Pete as the Secretary of Transportation. You heard about the Equality Act and how it's moving. You heard about threats across the states, opportunities across the states, the dangers to our trans community members and young people. You heard about opportunity for change on the state level. You heard about our trans justice work. You heard about our HIV work and the expansion with that new funding. You heard about the advance of the Corporate Equality Index, as well as our Time to Thrive Youth Conference. That's a lot of content in 2 weeks. We're doing all of that. And I just want you to really absorb just HRC is operating on every level, everywhere that you're interested, every place you interface, somewhere we're working to help make it better. So with that, let me bring everybody back on the screen together, and we are going to open it up for some questions that we have received from our members around the country. So I'm going to start with question number 1, and I'm actually going to invite Alfonso to answer this one. It's from Elizabeth in Phoenix, Arizona, and I think given this is day 3 of Black History Month, it really feels like the right question to open this up. And you touched on this a little bit, Alfonso, but Elizabeth wants to know, what are HRC's initiatives towards dismantling the white supremacy in our country and embracing and protecting the diversity of the LGBTQ community?
Ooh, heavy question, but an important one.
Yeah.
I took over the Human Rights Campaign about 1.5 years ago, as Chris said. And when I took over as president, my main priority was to make sure that the policies and the priorities of the organization were focused on people that were multiply marginalized. Some people don't really know what that means when I say that, so I'll briefly explain. You're multiply marginalized when you have one or more identities that are oppressed in our society. So we're talking about Black, transgender women who are afraid of walking home at night because they might actually not return. The violence against the trans community is in epic proportions. We're talking about a Black or Latinx man living in the South without access to healthcare, and he has or they have HIV. We're talking about a lesbian who is seeking a refuge in this country because she's being persecuted in her home country. And unfortunately, for the past 4 years, she's been demonized because she's been seeking asylum in this country. So we're talking about multiply marginalized people, because if we're going to actually achieve liberation, I believe the only way to do that is to actually focus on people who are multiply marginalized. We have a nation that unfortunately has been built in many cases on oppressive systems that have marginalized people of color, marginalized women, marginalized LGBTQ people. And we have to deconstruct that. And the way we deconstruct that is by taking all of the priorities that we're advancing and making sure we are focused on people who are multiply marginalized. So everything that you've heard today, all of the work that we're doing is really focused and tailored to achieve the goal through that lens, people who are multiply marginalized. And that is how we will ultimately dismantle systemic racism. We will dismantle transphobia. We will dismantle homophobia.
Thank you, Alfonso. So the next question, I think, is really for Jody, it's really it's from someone in Kansas who's really asking us about how we're going to ensure the executive orders can flow to public policy. What's the pathway to do that? And also, she's asking about how religious freedoms and sort of the desire to advance religious freedoms have the potential to erode our rights. So, Jody, why don't you take a crack at that? And I'm sure Sarah would love to jump in a little bit as well.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say too. Thanks, Chris, and appreciate the question from Kansas. In terms of just, how we see this going, this is, just because you have an executive order, if we were to lose the White House in 4 years, you do vision that a different White House could roll back some of these protections. And so that is also why we are forging ahead with everything we have on the Equality Act. And so we do need to see these protections enshrined in law. And so we are moving forward on that. And that is our main vehicle at the federal level. But those are echoed in states that don't have protections on the books too. So non-discrimination in the states is also going to be important in terms of passing protections. The strategy is very similar to what was done with marriage, where you were working at the federal level, obviously in the courts as well, but then also at the state level in terms of both beating back challenges, but getting those protections, on the books. And so the strategy are sort of, continue to be multi-pronged in terms of how we think about this. And as most of you know, if you've been around us for a while, we've been working on the Equality Act for quite some time. And the bill that is going to be introduced in a couple of weeks, basically, in essence, is the same bill. It does take into consideration the Bostock, gains from last summer in the courts. It does take that into consideration in the bill, but basically the bill is the same bill. So we can hit the ground running with that bill as soon as it's introduced. So that's piece one in your question. Piece two, is, look, there are going to be various attacks on this. And I think you brought up just one line of attack that will happen. And there are certainly folks who have a different vision for religious exemptions in this country. Now, part of what we would say to you is that, there already are religious exemptions in the Civil Rights Act. And so, part of the Equality Act fits under that. And so it isn't like there aren't any there. And so I think that's one important thing for you to know. And then the other piece is that, look, there is going to have to be some amount of reckoning around this question. We do have religious freedom in this country, and it is a well-respected right. And we have to have non-discrimination for LGBTQ people. We cannot be treated differently than other protected groups of people. And so part of what I think it will happen in terms of the religious exemption battles is there's going to be, interest in having individuals or corporations, like we saw with Hobby Lobby, have these rights and protections. That is not a fundamental individual religious protection in terms of your yourself versus our non-discrimination pushes in this country. So Sarah will give you a more nuanced and legal answer, but conceptually, we know we're going to have multiple of these battles. They're doing this in states where they want to use religion, as a sword and a wedge, not about bringing our country back together. And there is a different vision in terms of our values. Sarah?
Jody, I think you hit just about everything. I would just want to echo that religious liberty is a core American value, and it isn't necessarily at odds with LGBTQ people. LGBTQ folks are people of faith, and people of faith support LGBTQ folks. And so I think it's really important to remind people that there isn't this dichotomy that a small percentage of people in the United States, want to paint us into this corner. That the two can exist successfully alongside one another. Jody talked about the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and, of course, the Fair Housing Act. In all of these laws, there are protections for race and for sex and for religion. And they have existed successfully for decades alongside one another. And so adding LGBTQ folks on the same basis as everybody else doesn't take away anybody's religious freedom. It just ensures that LGBTQ people can't be discriminated against. And in fact, the Equality Act expands protections for people of faith. We don't think that somebody who is going, shopping should be discriminated against because they're wearing a yarmulke or because they're wearing a hijab. That people of faith should be able to go shopping without harassment. And that's what we want for LGBTQ folks too. And the Equality Act makes that expansion for both groups.
Great, Sarah, thank you so much for that. And just for a lot of our viewers, I know for me, absorbing the news feels really, we've all in that dark hole of sort of navigating the last several months. Now we sort of see the light of day, it feels brighter. But for some folks, just understanding the nuances between an executive order and passing the Equality Act, it's not always easy to differentiate. So people certainly read about the executive order extending protections that was signed on day one of the Biden-Harris administration. Can you just briefly explain the difference between an executive order like that and what the Equality Act would do? Just for those who, sort of miss over, we received a question like that, so I thought it'd be useful for just a quick clarification.
Sure. Executive orders aren't permanent. Sometimes they end up being permanent because each successive administration supports the policy goals. But other times, we have things like the Mexico City policy that when the White House flips from Democrat to Republican, gets changed every single time, about sort of our engagement with reproductive rights in other countries. And so the Equality Act is going to make permanent those gains. It's also going to cut off the necessity of having to litigate every single question. We don't want to have to go to court every time somebody experiences housing discrimination to argue that the Fair Housing Act covers LGBTQ folks. President Biden agrees with us that that's the right interpretation of the law, but an ex-president might not. Or frankly, there may be, a housing complex who wants to argue that they shouldn't have liability. So we just want to cut that off and guarantee for ourselves and for our kids that this is a permanent part of American federal law. And just sort of the last thing I'll say is there are lots of gaps in our federal laws where sex isn't covered. And so therefore LGBTQ folks aren't covered. And we need to make sure that we fill those gaps and expand protections for everybody, particularly, any place you would expect to go as a member of the general public and get goods and services. That's not covered by federal law right now for sex. And federally funded programs. Not all of them are covered. And we need our social safety net to protect all of us.
Great. Sarah, thank you so much. Jay Maurice, I have a great question from you from a member named Dave from Cincinnati. And he says, many persons, including LGBTQ people, have put off regular medical care, including STD, HIV testing, and counseling during the pandemic. How does HRC plan to advocate for preventative care needs for LGBTQ persons? And this feels really important, restore faith in federal agencies, the CDC, the NIH, that have been so politicized over the last 4 years, and the fear that there are anti-LGBTQ people populating those agencies.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. We had a conversation about this internally today. Our CBOs, community-based organizations, health departments, organizations that provide HIV prevention and care services have seen a decrease in utilization, particularly among like gay and bisexual LGBTQ men. What we're doing with this new funding, it allows us the opportunity to kind of really look at new ways of providing care to community, right? So when we talk about right now, like these community-based organizations, if people aren't willing to go into the organization, how do we now leverage some of our partnerships that we have as an organization to get people, for example, in-home testing kits, right? So that you don't necessarily have to go into an organization, but you actually can have tests sent to you. And it's also working with organizations to figure out, how and what are the best ways to keep their work staff safe in these community-based organizations and in the health departments and so on. So that's kind of like how and what we're doing right now. As far as like the CDC and the NIH and a lot of our federal health agencies, I totally agree. They have become politicized over the years. I'm confident that in the Biden administration, that we will see people who are from the community who have a vested interest in making sure and understanding that, people of color and LGBTQ folks in general, where the service deficits are and making sure that those needs are addressed. And also, in addition to that, being able to provide, making sure that competent and culturally reflective care is provided in those agencies. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Jay Maurice. This is a question for Jay, Jay Brown. We've heard a lot about the policy opportunities, like actual passing laws with the shift in administrations. But one of our members was asking about what the impact will be across agencies. And I know, Jay, like you actually sit in a really unique position with the work that you do. So I thought it'd be nice for our members and supporters to hear a little bit about what opportunities in terms of the lived experience for LGBTQ people sort of roll out with a shift in administrations like we've just experienced.
Sure. Well, that's a great question. And I'll give you one example. We have a program called Welcoming Schools. And in Welcoming Schools, we work with educators and teachers all across the US to make their classrooms more inclusive for LGBTQ students. About half of the work we do in that program is really supporting trans youth and non-binary youth in their journeys coming out in school. You know, it makes a huge difference who's in the Department of Education, whether or not a school is going to engage in our program and feel like they will have the protection and backing of Washington in doing that work that is vital for their students, work that they really want to do, but work that that they sometimes face challenges with folks in their communities who don't understand the importance of it. So the fact that we actually in October saw a leap, twice as many training requests from educators in Welcoming Schools this year than we did the year past, and that was between October and December when the election results came out. So we are seeing that more and more folks are really stepping up to the plate. And like I said, a lot of our programs were designed in the reality of a bad administration. Many of our programs started during the second Bush administration, realizing that there's a lot of work that we can be doing no matter what's happening in Washington to really advance policies and practices that can change our daily lives. While that is stuff that we will continue to do no matter who is in that White House, it gets easier, it gets stronger, it gets better when we are doing that in tandem of having that backstop of protection at the federal level. So that really goes across all our programs, knowing that as Sarah was talking about, protections in housing and protections in healthcare. We work with hospitals. Same kinds of things happen for LGBTQ people facing discrimination in those places, and the agencies can make a really huge difference in the experiences of people walking through those hospital doors and in the experiences of the folks that we work with trying to get those policies and protections and practices to change at that daily life level.
Great. Thank you, Jay. Before I ask Alfonso the final wrap-up question, I want to go back to ask a little bit about, obviously, first, congratulations on the CEI, tremendous success to see so many companies really moving forward. Tell us a little bit about how the work of the CEI also helps us actually advocate and advance, legislation, particularly the Equality Act, and sort of why the work that you all are doing actually also really helps create a space for legislation like the Equality Act and how you engage our corporate partners in that work.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. It's such a great question. First, one of the things that's really beautiful about the CEI is we often hear that phrase like it takes a village. It is really a product of not only all of the advocates in the building at HRC, but many openly LGBTQ people in their workplaces having those initial conversations with leadership to say, this is important to me as someone who works here, or this is important to me as a customer, that your brand, your company stands behind our community. And so we have, a whole network of people across the country who help us advance our cause. And it's really, we rely and thank you for all the work that you do as individuals out there who are watching tonight. With respect to the legislative goals, I think, it's important the position of business in our public policy, and not only just the influence that business has, whether we feel rightly or wrongly so, but also to business's own goals. Companies don't want a different set of rules in San Francisco than they have in Birmingham, Alabama. They want to be able to freely move employees and their families around the country and know that their values of inclusion are seamless. And so that's why we see companies taking, in some cases, a position We have over 320 companies that have signed on to support the Equality Act and are openly supportive of the bill. We have companies that have signed on to help fight these horrible bills that Sarah and Jody were talking about earlier in the states, and taking a position that, you think about an anti-trans sports bill that affects, K through 12, you might think, well, why does a company care about that? Well, they care about that because they have an employee who has a kid who's trans, who's affected by that. And that means that employee is not, fully present at work, not fully supported in their community. Their kid is under threat. And we have these champions in business who get that and who are going to come and be present with us, whether that's signing one of our statements opposing these kinds of bills, or even making a call to the governor at a critical time to help us defeat that legislation. And so it's really a holistic experience to work with companies to better their own policies, but then also have them work with us to better policies for everyone.
Great. Thank you, Beck. What I love about HRC is we really do have an integrated approach, and the way the programs all overlap and work with each other really does create a really powerful force that really is the organization that is, HRC. So Alfonso, first, I hope you've been sleeping better over the last 2 weeks with the new administration. I know all of us carried so much heaviness through so much, and even the last couple of days before the inauguration, it was a very stressful time for those of us who live in Washington, D.C. But through all of that, what I've appreciated is your steadfast determination to see us through these moments, to really help guide the organization through. And I thought I'd ask you a little bit about, I have 2 questions for you. One, HRC is often sort of seen as playing a really important game on the outside, but we certainly know you have some friends and new allies on the inside of this administration. So to the extent that you want to share, what kind of advice are you getting in terms of how we navigate and move forward, and how are you feeling about the opportunities in front of us to really advance our mission through the new administration? And the second question is from Maria on Long Island, who I know you know who Maria is. She's asking already about the midterms. It makes me a little anxious to sort of even think about the midterm elections already, but they're coming and they're coming soon. So I just thought it'd be good to give you a little bit of time to talk a little bit about where we are now and kind of what you're thinking a little bit down the road on the election front.
Sure. This is a new day for us, and I think appreciating that reality will allow us to seize the moment and realize so much of what is possible. President Biden, Vice President Harris, Secretary Buttigieg, Ambassador Susan Rice, Secretary Lord Austin, and the list goes on. We have allies in the administration. When I say allies, this is not ideological. Right? We have people that actually value diversity and inclusion. We have people that understand the importance of making sure that our government represents all of us. If you take a look at President Joe Biden's, I think it was first or second executive order, in the language itself, it talks about the recognition that government has a responsibility to represent all people. It's not a novel concept, but after going through the past 4 years, where our community has been assailed and demonized, it is a welcome change to see an administration that treats us with the dignity and the respect that we deserve. So I am, as the president of the Human Rights Campaign, and I know everyone on this call, we're seizing the moment because we understand we have an opportunity to advance policy to benefit our community. At the same time, we also know we still have a lot of work to do as it relates to cultural change. There were many people who still don't understand the importance of diversity and inclusion, who still believe in misinformation. And we have a lot of work to do to make sure that we get to those people, that we communicate with them, that we deconstruct the system and the infrastructure of lies and division, because that's unfortunately what has been spewed out from the White House over the past 4 years. And I am excited about the opportunities. I know we talked about the challenges, and there are many. But the fact that we are a community that was born out of adversity is something that gives me the strength. Like, we have our strength and we have our power. And that strength and that power has really been born in times of great uncertainty. Remember the days when we were being classified as criminals. Remember the beginning of the AIDS crisis. We are a community that is incredibly resilient, and we will continue to be resilient. We will continue to overcome obstacles. And I know that we will do that. We are smart, we're strategic, and we're going to get the job done, just like we did for the election, which now takes me to the midterms. We cannot rest on our laurels. We fought to make sure we elected pro-equality candidates up and down the ballot. And we have to continue doing this work. And that's what we need to always appreciate. The work of equality and getting to that place of liberation, we have to continue to work to get there. It is not winning one election. It is not passing a piece of legislation. It is not winning a lawsuit. We need to get to the point where we are treated equally. And in order to do that, we need to win as many elections as possible to ingrain equality in the fabric of this country. And that is what we're going to have to do. If the election is in 2 years, where we're going to have pro-equality candidates running again. And we need to make sure that we are just as committed to their success as we were this past November. Because in order for us to achieve equality, in order for us to achieve liberation, we need to invest in the process to do that. And that means continuing to do this work. And I know that many of you have been doing this work for so long. So I want to thank you for continuing to do it, and also ask you to remain in this fight, because we will need you in order to drive this train through to that place that we call equality and liberation.
Great. Alfonso, thank you so much. And, I've never seen HRC members as engaged as I did through this election cycle, which felt like it was never ending, because we went right from the main election right onto Georgia, right into the new inauguration. So I hope people get a little bit of a break, but we're going to pick right back up again on all of that. And it also feels like, we're reflecting on 2 weeks worth of work. I hope you've been surprised, excited, proud to hear what we're doing. And if you have more questions or things, you can always reach out to the Membership Services Department at HRC at any time to ask any of the questions. And also, I do hope you will join us by texting the text information below, 100 days to 472-472 to make it onto our list. We will do more of these events. We hope you'll stay tuned for them by texting to be kept up to date. You'll hear a lot more about those events on a regular basis. In the meantime, I want to thank all of my amazing colleagues. It's an honor to get to work with all of you. And we really feel a deep, deep, deep passion about getting to do this work to advance equality for everybody in our community. So thank you for joining us. Stay tuned, stay involved, and keep up the fight.